Hi, my name is TJ Weaver, and I'm the director of Mr. Sandman by Christina Quintana.
Hi, I'm Christina Quintana, also known as CQ, and we are gearing up for the studio retreat of Mr. Sandman and the playwright. Should have said that, I guess.
CQ, talk to me about Mr. Sandman.
So Mr. Sandman, I just described it as kind of a dream fuck of a play, and I actually like that description because as I've been working on this play, to me it's really, it sort of lives between a dream and reality the whole time. It's about this character M, who is sort of in the midst of kind of struggling to make the decision to transition as wanting to be a trans-masked person, and is a sanitation worker. And sort of as they're sort of going through kind of the process of deciding ultimately whether to transition or not, is kind of having these visitations from this figure named Jess, who sort of visits them in song and dream. And it's kind of like, to me, I mean, the whole idea of it is just really trying to really question in the way that they are questioning what gender and masculinity are in this world, in the context of our relationships, our romantic relationships, our friendships, as well as just, who we are, how we present,
Was there a specific event or article, or like what was the inspiration for the play?
So it's so funny because I love that song, Mr. Sandman.
Yes.
The Dream song, and
Which I never heard. I mean, I didn't know the title. I heard it, and then you put the title on it, and I was like, right, that's what that song is.
Yeah, so it's funny because like that song, I've always loved that song. There's actually there's this film called Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag that does this like really great version of that song. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but I don't know why. Like, so that song is like from a young age been on my consciousness for like some reason, and I don't know if it's because of that movie in particular. My parents were always like really big movie buffs and always let us like kind of watch everything. And so that song has like sort of always been back in my consciousness. And the thing that always strikes me about it is that one part of the song where it's like, you hear it's like Mr. Sandman, it's all these like women, and it's very like, give me a dream. And then like there's this one part where it's like, yes,
Yeah.
And it's this very like masculine, and there's something about that like just has always like stuck with me. And then I read this article, and you know me, TJ, in the sense that like I'm very obsessed with that kind of class, and I read an article about, I don't even remember how I stumbled upon it, but I read this article about a female sanitation worker in the Bronx, and I like learned about how actually being a sanitation worker in New York, at least, is like a really well-paying working class job. It's like a really good gig, and it was like this really interesting article about just like how this woman had sort of come into this world. And so I kind of became obsessed with it, and so I started thinking, I don't know, the two sort of ideas combined in my head, and I just kind of love the idea of thinking about a sanitation worker who was thinking about transition, and like sort of there was something about, I imagined the song, like, and I really saw it as this very like theatricalized, like, and it, and this whole thing of, that's such a like masculine thing when you think about sanitation work, right? And like heaving the big like loads over your back and like putting it in the car and like the guy's talking, you know what I mean? And so there was just something about that it felt just perfect. And so yeah, so that's kind of like the beginnings of it. So it just sort of came in my mind like as this combination. I actually remember the moment it crystallized. I was literally leaving my apartment and I was like, yes. Trans sanitation worker, Mr. Sandman. I remember telling my friend about it, who's a director who I adore, and she was like, that sounds like a horrible idea. And then we did a short version of it, and she's like, okay, that was actually it's kind of great.
Those ones where like the clouds in the park and the sun.
Yeah, right.
Like, actually, and it's just like where everything sort of comes together for you.
Right.
In terms of like the story, and then you're like, what are the next steps?
Isn't that funny?
But movement in your plays, like, I only know two of them.
Yeah.
Is that a big component of?
It's funny because I feel like musicality in some way has a role in like all of my work. I think it's funny because I'm not a musician, but I have a really musical sense of things, and like I always am, my partner always says, like, I remember songs, I remember things musically. I'm always like singing words, like phrases and stuff like that. And I've worked in musical theater, and so I think there is something to me about like physicality. I think just in general, I am excited about why things exist on stage. Like if I'm writing a piece of theater, I want to know, like, I don't want it, not that I'm not excited about, I think there are plenty of exciting plays that like exist in living rooms solely, but I really do, I believe that. Okay, that sounds like my voice was raising, but I mean it. I mean, there is a kitchen that exists in this play, but I do think there is something so exciting about like being able to mess with like a heightened reality and like really visit like theatricality on stage. So,
I mean, even just like the imagery of two people on the back of a truck.
Yeah.
How do you do that in theater?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, there's even when we're not necessarily moving and like, with our bodies, there is this sort of, I imagine, a rhythm.
Right, and like how you're playing with it, and like
exactly.
there's something, and I just like, I don't know, it's just something that people always say that my plays are poems, or like anything that I write actually ends up usually getting called a poem, which is a lovely thing to say. I mean, I appreciate it. But so I think that there's just like something about me that just like kind of keys into that sort of music and like what music is. And so I think because of that, there's been some physicality. I mean, obviously in terms of 3,000 seizures, TJ's referring like the seizures themselves become our physicalizations. There are 3 women who play these sort of seizures that kind of take over this woman Petra's life. And in this play, definitely really sort of keying off of that song, Mr. Sandman, like it being, and I think what you're saying too about the truck is interesting because it is this kind of like choreographed. It's a choreographed routine.
Yeah.
And there is something interesting about like the things that we do every day and how there is a choreography to them, even if they don't sort of, even if they aren't automatically seen as that way, But I love that. That's really cool. I think I'm trying to like think honestly, like in general, if all of my plays are super physical, these 2 definitely.
As a writer, how long did it take for you to sort of settle into your voice?
Wow, that's a great question.
I mean, and that sort of comes off of what you said about like deceivingly simple.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's such a great question. I think that it's one of those things like as a writer, you just like one of the most beautiful things I think about, being a writer versus like being, an athlete is that, right, with an athlete, it's like there's that expiration, but like as a writer, it just like you just keep fine tuning, and it just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And even when I look at work from 5 years ago, it's kind of startling. Like it's just like work that I can see just like how much crisper, like how much. I was talking to a photographer friend the other day. We were kind of talking back and forth, and I was like, "Can you see?" And he was like, "Oh yeah." When I look at old photographs from 5 years ago, I can see just like how I've had a better understanding of light and it's the same way. It's just like you, and like as a writer, it's just like so much of it is about living, right? So it's just like the fact of having lived through, experience. Like, I mean, the fact of, it's not, it was a horrible thing, but my father passed last year. And I honestly think in the last year, even just like the way my writing deepened, just sort of as a catharsis and also as just like a way of understanding on a human level, like that kind of grief that connects you with other people. And to me, that's what's exciting about being a writer is like connecting with others. And doesn't totally answer your question. I will say that I think a big part of that, a big part of me sort of finding my space as a writer was sort of, kind of keying into my various identities and then therefore being able to clue in on what it is I'm most excited about writing about, you know what I mean? Like I've come to realize that just, the stories that I'm most excited about are the stories about people who live in in-between spaces. The stories about people who aren't being seen, immigrant stories, which is so many parts of who I am. And I think that like just, queer stories, it's in that, like, I think just like sort of centering it on those things, not in an autobiographical sense, but just knowing who I am as a person has just made me that much stronger as a writer, you know?
Yeah.
But what about you?
You know, there's this interview with Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah.
And he talks about the voice and as an artist and how he sort of came to monsters and like his works sort of centralizing around that. And he talks about like you said, getting comfortable with basically the part of you that was picked on when you were in high school or like in middle school, and like the things that made you really uncomfortable that you tried to hide.
Yeah.
And it was like, actually your voice is
that. Right. It's the hurting place,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. It's like when you can sort of settle into that and be comfortable with who you are, that's when your like artistry sort of takes off, right? And it feels natural, it doesn't feel forced. And for me, like as a director, I'm still trying to figure out like what I think the term that we get thrown at a lot is, what is your aesthetic?
What is your aesthetic? Yeah.
What is your aesthetic? And
it feels so limiting as like a director.
It does a little bit, like to sort of say that, you know, my aesthetic is, you know, for me, I don't know. I don't know what it is yet.
How would you answer? Like, I mean, even that's interesting to think about. Is it purely thinking of it in the sense of like, you know, like, are you more like a commercial person? Are you like a downtowny kind of person?
I think that's like part of it, but it's also like visual. It's how you compose a picture on stage. It's you know, it's also musical versus play. It's kitchen versus, you know.
Right.
And you know, I often go into a lot of interviews and I don't know, I haven't figured out what that is yet because I've done mostly readings up to this point. I haven't had a chance to do a production.
Oh, that world.
And so, so a lot of the aesthetic question comes into throwing up productions.
Right.
And that's just where I am. I think that's a beautiful part of the process and like being a director.
Right.
But yeah, I don't quite know what that is, what my voice or aesthetic is yet. I'm still figuring that out, and part of me doing that is working on plays that interest me. I think that's the beginning of answering that question. You can figure out why you work on certain plays.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that's like the spark.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting that you say that because I remember when I was in grad school, I so wanted to like find out what my thing was so that like I would know, you know what I mean? Like what makes me, you know, CQ, like what makes a CQ play a CQ play, and like, which is so funny. But like, you know, and it's just like I had to just keep writing. Like literally, and then there's clearly things that make a CQ play a CQ play. So, but as a director, it is such an interesting, it's a conversation I've had with a lot of emerging writers too, that it's like, it's really interesting. It's been an interesting thing in my life because really only in the last few years have I started to really have like productions, you know, more so than just small, like, you know, short plays and stuff like that outside of workshops and readings. And it is like a funny thing when you're like in that world again, because it's just like, oh, right. Like I have to remember and learn how to be a playwright in tech. Because it's like, I've just been doing development things for so long.
Standing up to the director, how do you talk to designers?
Yeah, and like for the directors, I feel like you guys, oh man, you need to be able, like, it's like, you're home, you know, you are the, for like playwrights, it's easy, we can just like sit back, we're gonna be pounding. For tech, I feel like you gotta, you know, just like zip it up, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's such an interesting thing, yeah, with like the development, it's like, it's a funny thing because the development process is so vital, but it's like, it's so hard when things sort of get stuck in that circle, and it's like trying to like break out of that, you know, break out of that circle. And I think a lot about, it was a conversation that came up a lot when I was in grad school, which is now, you know, 5 years ago, but I'm sure it's still a big part of the conversation, was like thinking about how there was a time when the theater took chances on younger artists. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Like I love seeing that like EST is like doing a play with, you know, and Michaela Mahoney's directing it, who is, you know, a director who's like just, you know, not even done with grad school yet. Like how fucking badass. I mean, she's amazing and she should be directing it. But it's like, I want to see more theaters take chances on young artists. That
I mean,
way,
there's a
you know?
crop of us, like our peers. I think that like people. I mean, I am so excited about the wave of energy that's coming.
Yeah.
That the LARC is like.
Totally.
Many organizations in
Yeah.
the city and around the country are just like, we're here.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
we're doing.
Well, the LARC above, like, I mean, we're not just saying this because we're there, but
No.
LARC is just like a special. Like when Donnie said that the other day, we were in this group session here, and he was just like, "This place is literally like it's like a haven." I mean, it's a really special place for theater artists. How did you come to the LARC?
How did I come to the LARC? I was an intern in 2012.
Oh wow!
Yes, right out of school.
They were like, "Never leave, never leave."
I didn't want to leave.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. You were like, "How can I
It's
stay?"
like, this is a magical place.
Yeah, why would
I mean,
you ever? leave?
actually, to be like, for this to call, I call the LARC my home.
It is no.
For it to be my first home, and
Yeah.
you know, and it has such a unique mission.
Yeah,
I feel very lucky and fortunate.
I completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
this place is special for sure. Magic. You can like insert like sparkles. Sparkles.
I'm TJ Weaver.
I'm CQ, and we are inviting you to come out to the studio retreat of Mr. Sandman on March 26th and 27th. And the times are 7 p.m. on Monday and 3 p.m.
On
Tuesday. Yes. Join us.
Join us.
Ven conmigo.